I had a question and answer session here with a large group of people, and somebody asked me a question about yantra. I don't know much about yantra, but it's sort of a spiritually formed design that has some kind of a message. And it occurred to me that crop circles may be yantras.
Really?
You've seen many stories about the crop circles. They're all different. They're all very harmonious and
but how do you think those are created?
well, nobody knows, but they must be created by some sort of energy from, what, outer space? I don't think the Russians or anybody else can
Conspiracy
do that.
theories abound, evidently.
Well, I think that's the only plausible theory.
Mm-hmm.
They've tried to say that people come in and do these things overnight. You couldn't possibly do the kind of thing that they've done in such a short time.
Some of them happen over lunch, so it's...
Over lunch, exactly. No, I think the only thing is that it must be some people on another planet are trying to communicate with us, and they can't speak our language, and we can't speak theirs, but through symbolism they can. If we could only break the code, we could understand what they're trying to say to us. And why are they so persistent? It's probably kind of a warning.
One supposes... So obviously that presupposes life on other planets then.
Well, it seems to me ridiculous to think that this whole universe would be created with only one little body with a few people living on it. It's just too absurd. There have to be there have to be many planets that have life on them.
Swamiji, speaking of this little planet with a few people on it, how many people can this planet realistically support? We just crossed 7 billion some weeks ago or months ago.
Well, they say you might be able to support up to 10 billion, but you can't go much further. And then people say, well, where do they come from? Well, there are many planets they come from. And we've probably been on many planets. I don't know. I asked my guru, Yogananda, whether in a higher age the same people come back as they're coming back now. He said, oh no, there are many planets to go to, I've told you that. He said if they all kept coming back to the same planet, they'd find out too soon. I thought, now that's a dirty trick on God's part. But the reasoning is that he wants us to find out by our discrimination and not just because the truth is forced upon us.
So the game is a little deeper and more complicated.
It's much more complicated. He's a good playwright.
Swamiji, do you think then that reincarnation could be that people are incarnating on different planets and then come to a specific planet when they need to learn those lessons?
Well, I suppose that has to be it. Yogananda explained that there are different kinds of galaxies. And these are Indian teachings, and I should say that it's not an Indian teaching, it's a truth, which India has preserved, but other countries have lost sight of. But in fact, there are records of over 200 old civilizations, primitive civilizations, developed civilizations, who had similar beliefs that mankind goes through different ages. And those in the lower ages are still ignorant. Well, these three gunas that I've described are also inherent in everything in nature. The three gunas are tamo guna, or the darkening quality, rajaguna, the activating quality, and sattva guna, the elevating quality. So those things in us which pull us away from truth, Yogananda explained it like this. There's an ocean, when the waves appear on the ocean, this is how God created the universe. He sent the wave of delusion over the surface of his consciousness, produced duality. And in that duality, you've got the three gunas, because the middle one, the activating one, can push the wave up or push the wave down. It's the movement that moves upward or moves downward. And so, even in a low wave, there's a crest, middle, and a base. And so even saints have their tamasic quality and the fact that they sleep, for example. And so he said there are whole galaxies that are basically more tamasic, whole galaxies that are like ours, basically Rajasic, and then whole galaxies where the people live in simple villages, close to nature, very close to the astral world. There's very little separation between this world and that world. And it's a sattvic universe.
Swami, how would we understand those qualities in our own lives and what to do with them, or how to relate to them?
Anytime you find in yourself laziness, a desire to reject effort for self-improvement, a wish to sleep it off, these are your tamasic qualities. Rajasic is when you feel you've got to do things, and that it's your energizing things, and there can be Rajasattva and Rajatama. So you can be energetic in such a way that you go toward the darker quality. And then you have the super quality, which is the wish toward peace, kindness, calmness. And there you've got the interesting thing. Sattvic quality, the peacefulness, for example, resembles Tama, in the sense that it resembles the peace of superconsciousness, can resemble superficially the peace of dullness. And so people who reach that point, if they're still in the ego, they can fall. And thus it is until you've really learned your lesson, learned that peace must be the right kind of peace, positive, divine peace.
And dynamic in some way.
Dynamic, yes. And so we can rise and fall for many incarnations.
God didn't make it easy for us, did He?
It takes many millions of lifetimes to reach God.
Swamiji, if reincarnation is true, why don't we remember our past lives?
If you had been a murderer in this life, in your next life, to remember that you were a murderer would make it very difficult to become better. If your nature, if you develop the nature, because it isn't your essential nature, to be a drunkard, to remember that in your next life will make it much harder to change. Your memory is obliterated so that you have a chance to start with a seemingly clean slate. You've carried over those tendencies. In fact, doctors will say that there are some people who have that DNA that makes it inevitable. If they start drinking, they'll take one drink, they'll become drunkards. It's not DNA, it's memory. You were a drunkard before. That's why it's important not even to play with alcohol. Because many people, if they just do it from their first drink, they become addicted. Same with drugs. So we've got to learn to, every lifetime, try to start again.
Swami, is that the basis of the Greek myth of the river?
Of Lethe.
Where you
yes, or Lethe, yes.
Where you go across and you forget.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's no longer...
Yeah. And it's important. We need to forget. Otherwise you'd be hypnotized by all the mistakes you've made.
So
Yogananda used to say that a saint is a sinner who never gave up.
So the purpose of reincarnation is to learn like in a school.
Yes. Yes.
So, Swami, the people who do remember, children, for example, who have some memory of a past experience, does it mean they're more spiritual, or...
It doesn't mean that. No, there are many children who are very spiritual who don't remember. There's probably a reason for their remembering. There is also... sometimes the experience is very traumatic in a past life. But there are many cases. It's very fortunate that we're living in this age when literature can be diffused all over the world, where printing is cheap and there are computers and you can write quickly, and there's so much information coming out now about children who do remember past lives. Many children are reborn as their own former mother, for example, or father or brother. And it's very interesting. Excuse me.
So if someone is reborn...
Sorry?
Bless you.
Go ahead.
If someone is reborn that quickly, is it a choice of their soul or their ego, or...
Forgive me, I got this. It's not hay fever. Well, It's a choice of the soul, yes. It's the strength of desire, too. And this is why often when you come back more quickly, you remember much more easily. And it may be a sign of your being not so spiritual. But you certainly, if you're very spiritual, you do remember. Yogananda could remember all his past lives. But until you've reached enlightenment, many people, if their desires are strong, for example, you have a desire for smoking, or you're a smoking addict, let's say, then you'll come back more quickly. They don't have smoking in the astral world.
So in between those lives, what happens?
Well, they go to the astral world, unless they're very earthbound, in which they hang around this world like ghosts until they can find some body they can get into again. And sometimes they shortcut it and possess somebody. People who are, Yogananda said they're around bars, for example, where people go into unconsciousness. There are many ghosts waiting to possess people. When people are their will is sufficiently dormant, they can come in. But usually people go to the astral world. And there are many different worlds to go to. As Jesus said, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Those who have lived evil lives, they do go to a kind of hell. Those who have committed suicide will certainly not be welcomed with open arms on the other side. They've got lessons to learn. They've skipped school. They've got to go back and try again.
So this concept of hell, which is very prominent in certain religious traditions, certainly the Christian one.
It's a valid one, but it's not permanent hell. You can go to hell. It's not a fire necessarily either. In Tibet they think of it as freezing, not hot, because their main trouble is with cold there. But the main thing is that you don't suffer permanently. One person tried to commit suicide and was saved and brought back to life, but in that state she saw people even dating back to ancient Greece. They were just in a state of stupor. And people dressed in 18th century French clothing, and they somehow a light came in to save them, and she caught it and was brought out of that in time. But that can be also, you don't read about that in the books, but that can happen. That was her experience. She said that the vibration of that region was very similar to that of rock and roll music. She's gone around the country trying to warn people against that kind of music.